Nonfiction really has to be taught explicitly in the elementary classroom. When I was a student, and you may have had this experience, we switched back and forth between fiction and nonfiction. And my teacher never really indicated the features that would be different. I was really left to figure that out all by myself. The Common Core standards indicate that through the years, teachers have really relied more heavily upon fiction rather than nonfiction texts. But yet, students are required to work with elaborate types of information frameworks that are more similar to a nonfiction construct than to a fiction construct. Students are required to read directions, be able to do research, be able to negotiate the internet, and do things that require a level of sophistication and organization that fiction just may not relate to as much. You do want to do both, but you want to show students that both fiction and nonfiction have very discrete and unique types of frameworks that are used. For nonfiction, you have, especially in the areas of maybe science or social studies, you have frameworks such as listing, cause and effect, comparing and contrasting, the use of dates, perhaps problem solution, compare and contrast, and time ordering. Whereas in a narrative framework, you have much more of a structure that has a beginning, middle, and end, plot, characters, setting, and thematic development. Now, nonfiction text, as mentioned, do have unique features. And one of the things we as teachers need to do is teach these features explicitly and not just inferentially, because students who do not learn how to use these text features will not develop the necessary comprehension skills to negotiate nonfiction. And here you see on this page that the print features that are involved, the organizational aids, the graphic aids, and illustrations add to an understanding, a better understanding of information text. Print features that are in the book support the comprehension, such as the font, things that are italicized, things that are bulleted, headings, subheadings, labels, captions, diagrams, maps. I would go as far as to say that when you're evaluating a textbook or a nonfiction type of book, that you look for these print features because they do support a student being able to use their schema to better understand the comprehension, and these help to develop schema for the student. Now, you don't want a book that's too busy, but certainly you do want something that does have headings. You want something that does italicize important words. You want something that has labels where appropriate. Graphic aids are also very important. Diagrams, charts, maps, tables, timelines. These are the types of things that students can, again, grasp information. Organizational aids, such as tables of contents, glossaries, prefaces, and then illustrations, especially illustrations that support the text in a strong way and are very representational of what is being said. Now, I made the mistake when I did, I was working with the students on the EdTPA and the methods course, and I picked a book on the gold rush for 5th grade, and I thought all books were created equal. I realized that my book was not on the list of the Common Core Standards suggested books, and I realized why when I looked at it. It was a very hard 5th grade text. It did not have a lot of graphic aids, and it had few organizational aids. It did have some print features, but it made it very difficult because there were not headings and charts where appropriate, and students really had to muck their way through the text and find some of the structures on their own. We realized that embedded in the text was some cause and effect structure, some listing structure, some compare and contrast. But a good book will scaffold for students and will make this type of information rather obvious to the student. And as you can see here, a good book has a caption for the students so that they can begin to even do a book walk and go through the book and start to understand what the book is talking about. and I'm just going through some Pinterest, different types of activities that teachers have done to help with nonfiction. Let me talk a little bit about introducing nonfiction in the classroom. You really want to have four major steps in introducing nonfiction. You want to make sure that you are explicit in your instruction. You want to talk about why the strategy is important, the steps in the strategy, and when to use the strategy. For example, if you're talking about compare and contrast, you want to talk about why would that be important to compare and contrast maybe two processes or two, if we're looking here at Roanoke Island, maybe talking about comparing and contrasting the experiences of settlers in two different locations. How to go about using or finding that strategy, when to use it and when not to do it, and you want to model it explicitly. So students need to work through a lot of guided practice, giving them cues and reminders, and then they need to be able to apply the strategy. And they're encouraged then to use the strategy in a new reading situation. It's very important to be explicit in instruction. You want your students to be strategic readers. You want them to be able to look at the reading task and decide for themselves the best way to approach it. You want them to be autonomous readers. You want them to monitor their understanding and decide which strategies to use when they're confronted with a problem. That's what we do as mature readers. You want to also be explicit in terms of modeling and showing a think aloud. You might say to the students, these are things we say to ourselves when I approach nonfiction. What's my problem? Who or what can help me with this problem? How can I try to figure it out? Where have I been in a situation like this before that I can do this? How will I best, what strategy will best work here? What strategies have I used in my class? What has my teacher demonstrate works well? Thinking aloud about reading also serves to enhance the students' comprehension monitoring, and it's a tool in encouraging readers to make connections with other things they've already read. So you want to develop a lot of metacognitive ability. Think aloud. So you're going to talk aloud as you do a book walk. With this particular book, you will talk out loud and show the students how you negotiate a difficult text or a nonfiction text. Scaffolding refers to giving support and guidance and instruction. Vygotsky talked about this in his zone of proximal development, the difference between what a child can do independently and what they can do with help. So when you teach explicitly these strategies, you're really scaffolding and you're helping students to eventually be able to work with these strategies on their own. And again, you do want to make sure that there is transference and that the student is actually applying their new knowledge to other areas. Now, one of the things I really enjoy doing as I work with nonfiction is also pairing nonfiction with a fiction counterpart. And that's a lot of fun for students, especially the students who struggle with nonfiction. For example, if you introduce a book about bats by Celia Bland, you might want to introduce Stella Luna by Janelle Cannon. If you talk about comets and meteors and asteroids, you might want to introduce Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. If you want to talk about how teddy bears are made, or talk about Theodore Roosevelt, you might want to talk about the book Old Bear. So there's always a great fiction counterpart to nonfiction, and a lot of the companies are really doing some good stuff with that right now, and you can actually purchase the pair of both books, and that really supports comprehension. You can also make sure that you go through, initially, the very first lesson with nonfiction, you should have students sit down and look at all of the text features. For example, the table of contents, the preface, the introduction, the heading, topic sentences, labels, caption, bullets, and you want them to talk about what they think the purpose is. I love to get sticky notes and have students just fill the books with stickies and label every type of text feature that they see in that book. So that's really an important thing to do. Get very comfortable with those text structures. What you do want to do also with nonfiction is make sure, again, you have a before, during, and after reading. Okay, before reading, activating prior knowledge and previewing the book. During reading, helping them to make connections, ask questions, predict, and check their predictions. After reading, do some kind of visual of the book, maybe some kind of graphic organizer. Summarize, synthesize, go beyond the text, talk about what they think. You might have them do a partner retell. It's a really interesting way to find out if a student gets the gist of what is going on in the nonfiction selection if you do a retell. Because in order to do a retell, a student needs to really indicate a main idea. They need to have evidence from the text, something they learned, something they already knew, a conclusion they made, maybe questions they have, what this book might remind them of. Again, this demonstrates comprehension if the student is able to abstract at this level. With nonfiction, you want to also make sure that you address any difficult vocabulary. The EdTPA talks about this as academic vocabulary, and these are the words that students would read, write, and think about in the classroom. So it's procedural words that you need for that content area, but it's also the academic lingo that goes along with the specific thing that you're teaching is important. Now, as you're doing these different text features again, or these the strategies that are used to read nonfiction, you do want to make sure that you teach students how to do graphic organizers that go along with them. So compare and contrast, you might have a T-chart. You might also have a Venn diagram. You might be using graphic organizers such as webs to help students see the details, the main idea and the detail. You might have, for cause and effect, you might have a flow chart. Very important that you also have a graphic that go with these. And you'll find that your learning disabled students will greatly benefit by graphic organizers and mapping out some of this information, because if they're struggling with executive function, that's an organizational issue, and anything you could do to organize information related to nonfiction is incredibly important. Now, remember, when you do your EdTPA, for those of you who will have to do that, you will probably be working with a nonfiction text. And you will see that as you're working in the classrooms, that most of the classes will be dealing with nonfiction text, because that is, again, the thrust now of the Common Core standards.